My name is Shayla Oscano, and this is my defense of instruction. A little bit of background. I went to Beverly Hills High School for 3 days to teach a geometry class of combined special education students and English language learners. As you can see here, here are the demographics of Beverly Hills High School as a whole. In this particular class, I had approximately 20 students. Half of them were female, half of them were male. And there were no advanced students in this classroom. Most students were either at risk or at grade level. The current unit that I was teaching was a unit on parallelograms, and the previous unit was congruent triangles, and the following unit there we were going to talk about quadrilaterals. The academic goals for this class were 75% of the class will be able to explain how all shapes are related, and 90% of the class will also be able to participate during Just Think pair shares. Professional goals was to use an engaging hook and use at least 3 different variations of check for understanding. So lesson overview for one day. So the hook that I first used was a Coca-Cola versus Pepsi YouTube commercial. It was Coca-Cola versus Pepsi commercial. The Just Think part of it was students were to sit down and think on their own as they watched the video the second time around, not the first time around. It was based on this video, which vending machine would win. So as you can see here on this small snippet of it, here's a Coca-Cola vending machine and here's a Pepsi vending machine, and then they kind of just throw Pepsi and Cola cans at each other for about a minute, and then a person is to come up and they're trying to decide whether they want Pepsi or Coke, and then they obviously put their money into the machine that they want and then they take it. So they were to watch this up until that point, and then afterwards they were going to sit down with their oval partner and discuss which product is actually better. And are Coca-Cola and Pepsi basically the same product? The purpose of this hook was based all around the idea that they had just finished learning about congruent triangles, and we were going to go into parallelograms and proving parallelograms, but a huge part about being able to write a proof for a parallelogram is you have to be able to show how certain sides can be the same, or how lines are parallel, or how certain angles are the exact same angles. The IBE that was used following this hook was called What Do You See? And so all of this revolved around the idea of similarities and congruencies and how math is related into real life. And so these are buildings that have shapes in them that are pretty prominent, and students were to use a highlighter or a colored pen or a marker to trace the shapes that they saw in each of these buildings. Then afterwards, we sat down and discussed. During this part of the class is when I had to stop and look and see how students were progressing through this part. And so I asked them to put a fist up if they were done and they didn't need any more time, or put a one finger up if they wanted one more minute, just so I could take a gauge as to what we were looking at before we jumped into a classroom discussion. Then during the active practice, I gave them a worksheet where students had to basically describe or find a way to link all the shapes that are found. So a triangle, a circle, a square, a rectangle, a rhombus, etc., etc., etc. they had to find a way to relate all of them. They had the option of either drawing a Venn diagram, which some students chose to do, writing it out, but this particular student decided to draw a web. And she wrote sheeps right in the middle. And I don't know, right here she, I guess, was trying to find a way to get a triangle and a square relate to each other. But in the end, she ended up writing like 2 triangles combined to make a hexagon, or a rhombus can be the shape of a kite, or triangles make up a square, which was exactly what I was trying to get them to do. And the way that I was gauging as to whether they understood the instructions to this one, because it was a little bit vague and more self-instructed, was I asked them to put a thumbs up and thumbs down if they understood the instruction. Most of the students ended up putting a sideways thumb because they weren't too sure what was going on. And so I had to go on the board and draw like an example of what I did. And so mine did not have words. It was a triangle, a circle, and a square, and then I would just try to draw shapes to link them together. As I gave them about 20 minutes to work on this worksheet, I was trying to gauge to see how much more time the students needed, and so I told them, once you are done, go ahead and put your hand on your head. And students were actually collaborating with that one, which was a little weird, and they weren't so sure as to what to do. Unfortunately, we ran out of time for our exit ticket, but this ended up being the initial discussion that we had as our hook for the following day. So next steps as to from what I noticed in the classroom was I had the exact same students participate all the time. I think out of the 20 I had, maybe 4 would always participate. And so I noticed that it had to do a lot with how students related to the content. So if they had no idea what I was talking about, they probably weren't going to talk. But also as to how I related with them. The teacher whose classroom I was in was fortunate enough to I was fortunate enough to get feedback from her. And so she just mentioned to me on my second day, just make sure you ask them how they're doing, how their day was, and what did they do, what didn't they do the night before, in order to get students more comfortable with you. And so this research by Tartar mentioned that it was an article about international students from Turkey being in graduate class and at first not participating at all, and then the more the professor started to relate to them and understand their culture, the more the students started to open up. And so the measurable goal for a future classroom of mine would be to get 3 different students to participate on different days. Not the exact same 3 students. Obviously, they're always welcome to answer, but always get a different student answering every day. Another goal of mine, another next step of mine would be for students to be able to write 3 or more sentences on their exit ticket when asking for justification. The reason for that was, obviously, we didn't get to their exit ticket on their first day. But when asked to be prepared to come to class the next day to be able to discuss this, like I mentioned before, it was the exact same 3 students, but no student actually really wrote anything down. They just kind of talked about it the day of. And so I actually want students to write things down. But at the same time, I think it had to do with the instruction that was given to them. It wasn't broken down well enough for them to be able to provide the result that I wanted. And so in this article by Zhang, Ding, and Mo, on the effects of visual chunking, it was talking about how students with math disabilities needed to have more visuals present for them. And so the instruction that was given to them was all verbal, it wasn't even written down. And so for this particular one, it would be students, knowing the group I had, which were majority special education students, I probably should have visually found a way to chunk it down for them, either write it down on the board or um, put up pictures or something like that in order to get students to write 3 or more sentences for me on the exit ticket. Thank you. This concludes my defense of instruction.